Welcome, everyone, to the press conference for Downsizing. The script by Alexander Payne and Jim Taylor opens with a Norwegian scientist making a breakthrough he thinks will save humanity, a technique that can shrink people to 5 inches tall. That means they use a tiny fraction of the resources they once did and need to pay less, allowing people of modest means to grow instantly rich by becoming small. Please help me welcome the panel: Alexander Payne, Matt Damon, Chau, Christoph Waltz, Jim Taylor, the screenwriter, and Mark Johnson, the producer. Congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
Tell me, it feels like a different kind of movie for you in some ways, and in other ways not so much, but tell me where the inspiration came from.
The original idea came from an idea batted around between Jim Taylor's brother Doug Taylor and Jim Taylor. And they would talk about, geez, if you were this small, you know, you could have a big house on a big lot and only so much space, and your food bills would be so low, and on and on. And then Jim kind of presented that idea to me, and as we would, between films, think, well, what are we going to write next? And I didn't really know what to do with the idea myself. And then a couple years later, it occurred to me, I came back to Jim and I said, oh, your idea about small people, what if we did that in a super realistic and even kind of quasi-political way? And if it were proposed as a solution to overpopulation, and then a whole bunch of other stuff unfolded from there. It became a nice prism for us.
And Jim, what was your reaction to that? When he said, let's do this, let's flesh this out.
I was thrilled, of course, yes.
Well, all right. This took a little while to make. Did you not start writing this in 2008 or 9? 2006. And why so long till we see it on the screen? And what is it about a project like that that keeps you enthusiastic for that amount of time?
They waited for me to age into the part.
Is that what it is? Yes.
It's a big idea, and it was challenging for Jim and me to take an idea which could have been a mini-series or a TV series, and corral it into a manageable 2-hour feature film. So the screenplay took a while, and then it took quite a while to find financing. Had the budget we desired been a little bit lower, it wouldn't have been so hard, but we kind of wanted to make it in a first-class way, we felt, and that took a bit of time.
Matt, you've been talking about this film a little bit, and one of the things that really grabbed me, and one of the things that's come up over and over and over in interviews that I've been doing here, is people are talking a great deal about empathy these days. I think when you live in troubled times, maybe it's something that is sort of top of mind for some people. And you've said here that movies are the greatest tool for empathy that we have, and you think that this movie is in some ways a beacon of that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a very kind of humanistic and heartfelt movie that is, for me, very kind of optimistic at its end and about the way we treat each other. And yeah, I do believe that, you know, I mean, look, we started telling stories to each other the minute we could communicate, and, you know, drawing pictures on cave walls, and it's the way we relate to each other and we understand each other. And so movies are the kind of the most technologically, you know, advanced way we've learned to tell each other stories. I think it'll get into virtual reality, and that'll be even a greater tool for empathy as we can kind of experience things, you know, or like even with technology now, like the Facebook live stream of Philando Castile's last moments in a car. Like, I think, you know, forever changed me, you know, because I was suddenly in the car with him, you know. So I think the technology is, I hope, making us more empathetic, despite what we're seeing kind of politically right now in my country.
For the other members of the cast, tell me what it was about this script that immediately appealed to you. Hong, we'll start with you.
Oh, well, for me, this role was sort of like a beautiful, odd and funny love letter to my parents, because my parents are Vietnamese refugees, and they speak with a really strong accent, and when we first came over, they didn't speak any English, and so they worked cleaning toilets, washing dishes, and they still somehow managed to raise 3 kids and send them to college. So that's a pretty amazing thing. But my whole life, I've always felt like I was the more acceptable version of my parents, and they were always the people who had to kind of, stay in the background or go hide in the broom closet, because that was, in order for me to be more acceptable, I had to sort of distance myself from where I came from, and that's not something that I ever felt comfortable with. And I grew up in Louisiana, and I remember a lot of my friends, white friends, saying like, oh, I don't even think of you as Asian. I just kind of think of you as like white, just like me. And that, I understood what they were saying, but at the same time, I was like, well, I'm not white. That I would like you to see me for who I am and where I came from. So this was an amazing opportunity to play a character that I have never seen portrayed with such layers and complexity and with so much humor, because a lot of times things sort of get presented in a very earnest and documentarian-like way, where sometimes when I tell my life story to people, it's either like their eyes glaze over like they're watching a PBS documentary, or there's like a certain amount of guilt or uncomfortableness that they don't know what to do with. And my parents' story is like so crazy, and I've always had people say like, oh, they're amazing people. They sound like amazing people, but that's not how they're treated when they walk outside the house. They're not treated like amazing people, and they are. So this was important to me in that way. And then also just to get to work with Alexander and Matt and Christoph and Jim Taylor and Mark Johnson, who's produced pretty much everything that really everything that we admire and love. And this, it's so brave of Jim and Alexander to have written a character like this, because it's one of those characters that people are really afraid of. And not a lot of people would want to even attempt to do it because they're either not interested or they're afraid of getting it wrong.
Yeah, and why are people afraid of a character like this, would you say?
I think right now the progress that is kind of easy to get behind and be excited about is when people see women or people of color entering spaces that were previously dominated by whites or by white males. And that's great. I'm glad that there are Asians in space, and that there are Asians in rom-coms, and there are Asian sitcoms. I'm very glad for those things. But at the same time, I would hope that people like my parents aren't being pushed aside and being seen as not a positive representation of Asians or Asian Americans. So that's, this is a very complex character, and I'm glad that it will sort of confront a lot of people's expectations of what positive representation is. So it's I don't think it's like a slam dunk sort of yeah, but it's that those are the more interesting characters, I think.
And Christoph?
I want it to be small. I also find the idea of getting 2,000 smokes out of one cigar appealing.
Yeah. For $1 a cohiba. Yes. Yeah. Do certain elements of this film have a new context than, and this would be, I guess, let's bring Mark into this conversation as well. You've been attached to this for a long time, I would assume.
Actually not. No. In the scheme of it, I think probably 2.5 years.
Right.
And Jim and Alexander have been involved with it and trying to make it for, as you pointed out, what, about 12?
Yeah.
So I'm a relative newcomer.
But do some of the ideas in this film have a new context than they may have when they were first written, Jim? Politically? I mean, this film seems very timely, and I wonder if the script changed and evolved over time given recent events, or if it is the script that you originally wrote in 2006.
We were never trying to write into the zeitgeist, but somehow it is interesting that there seems to be a lot of things peaking at the moment that with a movie this size and this kind of complicated, it's sort of impossible to be of the moment, but somehow a lot of things have turned out that way.
Even having Mexicans and Central Americans living behind a wall,
Yeah.
we didn't anticipate that that image would acquire.
Such literal meaning.
Yeah, right.
And Mark, can you speak to that at all, even over the last 2.5 years of your involvement?
Well, on one hand, for a lot of reasons, selfishly, I'm glad they didn't make it 12 years ago, and it's more and more. It couldn't be more relevant in so many ways. And I think for me as a producer, the most important thing was helping Alexander protect that it still be an Alexander Payne movie, so that despite the panorama and their visual effects, and it has a very big and I think ambitious canvas, what I'm so proud of is the fact that it very much speaks to Alexander and Jim's characters. And I find that while it may have it's not a very hopeful picture of the future, it's a very hopeful, and that's why I keep saying it's their most positive movie, I think, in that how it details how we need to confront dealing with this world that is constantly scaring us and we're butting up against, but what it takes to be a decent person.
Matt, we talked about empathy a little bit earlier, but what, apart from that, do you hope people take away from this film?
Well, look, I can't believe that. I mean, when I read the script, I just was giggling because I couldn't imagine that this movie could get made in the studio system, really. I mean, it's so unique and original and I think beautiful and I mean, I don't want to lead people towards what they should think. I think there are a lot of things to think after you see this movie, and I wouldn't change a frame of it. I'm so proud to be a part of it and with this group of people and that in this day and age in the movie business, we could get something of this scale made. And the fact that Paramount was willing to do it, I think, is great, and it means that movies aren't totally dead yet.
Alexander, there's all sorts of really wonderful little details, and I was saying to you backstage, one of my images that stays with me is after the characters have been downsized, they're taken with little spatulas by regular-sized nurses and carefully placed onto tiny little gurneys. Tell me a little bit about coming up with the look and the feel that you wanted to, because while it's very funny, that scene, it's also quite tender. I mean, there's a real tenderness in the way that these nurses are treating these tiny little humans. Tell me a little bit about creating that.
Well, obviously, a lot of it came from the screenplay. The spatulas are in the screenplay. The fact that the downsizing chamber itself was to be fashioned like a large microwave oven in some way, that came from the screenplay. But I charged our wonderful production designer, a woman named Stefania Cella, with, and also I thought it would be funny. I wanted what would be a high-tech process to have a very low-tech and still human feel to it. And and similarly, I told the visual effects supervisor, a guy named James Price, that I wanted the effects in the film to be so realistic as to be almost banal. Right. As all kind of spectacular things do in the real world, they eventually acquire a type of banality, and I wanted that.
I'll turn it over to the audience. Bruce Kirkland, traditionally always the first question at these press conferences. Hello, Bruce. Everyone, hello, Bruce.
Bruce Kirkland, Toronto Sun and Post Media News Network. So, I'm intrigued because you're sitting here today for this film, and you said that it means that movies aren't totally dead yet. The whole festival reminds me that that's true. And while I don't want to ask any questions about Suburbicon specifically, because you're here for Downsizing, twinning those two movies together is really fascinating to me, because these are movies that are hugely entertaining and yet at the same time profoundly meaningful for how we live our lives. So I wouldn't mind if you expanded on that a little bit with that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way about Suburbicon. We did what we wanted to do, and I wouldn't change any of it, and I can't believe it got made. So, but you know, it was more. Well, I guess I can believe it because the budget wasn't. You know, this is obviously with all the effects. I mean, when Alexander first talked to me about it, he said, "Well, I want it to feel kind of like a Hal Ashby movie, but with these special effects, you know, that are completely banal." And you know, and if you accept this like ridiculous premise and just have fun and go with the movie, you know, it's really wonderful where it takes you. And so, so yeah, I think those two movies, and again, a lot of the movies in these festivals. This was in Venice and Telluride, and a lot that I was reading about these other movies. Yeah, I think this is real. You know, where stuff is really happening in cinema, and it is always kind of reinvigorating to come through and sit and see what's going on and talk to some of the filmmakers, and it re-energizes you.
I think movies will never die. We love movies too much.
Hey, Christoph?
Can I ask you a question? Yes. Why do I hear surprise or an emphasis on something extraordinary that an entertaining movie can be relevant?
Because so many are not, and
Well, yes.
I'm getting the weight of that fatigue, and then I get refreshed.
Oh, thank you.
When
Thank
I
you
see
very
an
much.
Alexander Payne movie, when I see a George Clooney movie, and many other directors who struggle to do that. Thank you.
Other questions right here? Go ahead. We'll bring a microphone to you.
Oscar Wilde
Right here in the second.
Oscar Wilde said famously, when you tell people the truth, you have to make them laugh at the same time, or else they'll kill you.
Yeah.
Jan Price from iHeartRadio, and this question's for Matt and Christoph. What attracted you to this script, and how long have you both been attached to it?
Well, when Alexander first told me, he came and we met, and he said, "I have a movie for us to work on together." And we had first met in 1999, and very briefly, and I said, "I would love to work with you someday." And 17 years later, or whatever it was, he showed up, and he said, "I have a movie finally, you know." And he said, "It's about people who shrink down to 5 inches in height." And I wasn't sure if it was a test, if he was, you know. So I was really kind of circumspect with I said, "Okay." You know, I didn't want, just in case he was just going, no, it's not. It's about a lawyer who, you know, wins a big case, and, you know. So I think, I mean, the first attraction for me was Alexander, and Steven Soderbergh. When I first started working with him 17 years ago, at that point, I think Alexander had done 2 or 3 movies, and 2 or 3. And, you know, we would sit around on the set of Ocean's 11 talking about directors, and when Alexander's name would come up, well, he's 3 for 3. He's 3 for 3. And then I've done 8 movies with Steven, and invariably Alexander's name, he's 4 for 4. He's 5 for 5. He's 7 for 7, you know, and so he's just got this incredible body of work and body. Incredible body. Incredible body, which not a lot of people know. I think they do, but it goes kind of it's kind of overshadowed by his body of work. So I would have done The Phone Book if he'd asked me to do that, but instead he asked me to do this incredible script. And as we've been saying, it's just so unique. It's so crazy. It's like unlike anything. And from a narrative, it just takes this incredible left turn in the middle of the movie. And it's like, who's doing stuff like this? It's just so hard to find stuff, especially at this scale. I just wanted to be in it. So.
And Christoph, the question was directed to you as well.
Oh, yeah, I attached myself. Alexander didn't want me, and I talked him into it.
Thank you.
And it worked out well for both of you. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, right here in the front.
Hi, Ritam from Phoenix TV. My question is for Hong. When you play this character, what kind of challenge do you have in terms of physical, in terms of language with accent? At the same time, you have to make it authentic. Thank you.
Well, in terms of the accent, as I said before, my parents speak with a very strong accent, and I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is where a lot of the Vietnamese refugees came, and so my whole community is just, people just like my parents, and I have an ear for that, and Vietnamese is my first language, and I never speak English to my parents at home, so that's, in terms of the accent, it wasn't difficult for me to drop into it, but the difficult thing about that was keeping the accent authentic while also honoring Jim and Alexander's writing, because there is a certain rhythm to it, and so I didn't want to lose that, I wanted to fuse the authenticity with their humor and their writing, and also we're not doing a real actual person who exists, and this is a character that they've dreamed up in their imagination. So it was a fusing of my background and their writing and their imagination and creativity. In terms of the physical with playing an amputee, I had an amputee consultant here in Toronto, actually, and she had been an amputee for about 5 years, which was roughly the same amount of time my character had been an amputee, and so she was also a below the knee on her left leg. And she took me to the rehabilitation center here in Toronto where she had done her rehabilitation, and so I got to work with the physical therapists, and I wore an apparatus, and I think it was called an iLeg, where students who are training to be physical therapists use that in order to sort of sympathize or be able to understand what their patients are going through when they're being asked to, okay, now pick this rubber ball off of the ground. And it really changes everything in your body and your balance. And so that was very helpful for me to do very simple tasks that we take for granted, but that you actually have to recalibrate your thinking, and going up and down stairs is a extraordinary challenge. So that was a little bit of what I did for the physical part of the character.
Yeah, right in the back here.
I'm Veronica from W Radio Columbia. My question is for Mr. Waltz. It seems like the typical response to knowing that you're in a movie is, oh, is he the bad guy? So having this part in mind, how do you feel about that? Are you ready to be known for something extremely different?
I don't mean to be rude, but the bad guy thing is your problem, not mine.
Moving on, do we have other questions? Tell me about the technological aspect of this. Is this something that you're keen to do again? Because it is a much different kind of thing. I don't know that your other film, certainly I don't think your other films have had this amount of special effects, and they may have said some, but...
He's directing the next Star Wars. I don't know if you knew that, yeah.
Every film is different. This story needed visual effects, so visual effects it has, and visual effects I had to learn. And also, I'm in my mid-50s, and it was fun to learn this bag of tricks that all these other filmmakers are doing. It's so ubiquitous these days. I do not, now that I have sucked on the teat of visual effects, I do not necessarily wish to do that again, although I would be happy to. It really just comes down to what does the story require. However, let me say this, we definitely needed visual effects in this one because of the big and small difference in scale, but I certainly take my hat off to films which can achieve things without visual effects, and I take my hat off to Mr. Nolan this year with Dunkirk, who, while it has a lot of visual effects, it also sought to avoid them. And just think of trying to make Apocalypse Now today. And I mean, they did all that.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's something to be said for actually doing things.
Interesting you mentioned Christopher Nolan and Dunkirk, because that's a film that to me is all about community. In a world where people have grown increasingly about the individual, it's a film that is all about bringing large communities together. And I think in a lot of ways this film is about that as well. Whether the communities, I don't want to give anything away, but at the end of the film, there are sort of two distinct communities, a smaller family unit, I would think, and then a larger community that make different choices, but they're working in concert with one another, which is, when I walked out of there, what I thought was the hopeful part of this movie, because it is essentially, an apocalyptic film on some levels, but you walk out going, I think things may be okay if we can come together.
Big if.
Well, it is a big if. Yeah, it is a big
very
if.
deep inside a mountain for about 8,000 years.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, good luck.
You don't know. We don't know how things are going to turn out. Other questions from the panel? Yeah, go ahead, right here. Oh, you've got a microphone here for you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Pahul from Mint Lounge in India. If downsizing were an actual concept, I'm curious to know which of you might ever consider taking the leap.
I would not. I really don't think Alexander and Jim completely thought through the whole cat, bird, and bug thing. So, yeah, I'd stay big.
To say nothing about the eyebrow thing.
Yes,
you have to
right,
shave your
right.
eyebrows off, and it's remarkable how different people look with no eyebrows, which you learned, I would think.
Yes, it's not a strong look for me.
Anyone else on the panel? Anyone downsize, choose to downsize?
I'm 5'1", so I already feel downsized.
We're already pretty small.
They're all pretty small. Other questions? Is this a funny drama? Is it a dramatic comedy, or is it a sci-fi film? How would you categorize it, if you would categorize it?
I would not.
You would not, yeah. You would not.
No, look, I get that question a lot. Inside of me, I always tell myself I'm making a comedy. Even if it's a dramatic film or more dramatic one like The Descendants, inside of me, I'm sort of operating in a comic mode. But those categories that you ask about are really for others to say.
And I think its biggest strength for me is that it's very hard to define. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what it is myself, and I think that's a real asset. And as pointed out before, studios don't make movies that are original, which is what we all value. There's, as Matt was saying, that the originality is in short order right now, and the fact that Paramount made this movie is really impressive, and not just to give Paramount a shout out, but it's pretty much unheard of these days.
And I think they're cracking it this time, but I've never had a good trailer.
Really?
This is my 7th feature film, and I think they're going to do a good job with this one because they have to. But my previous 6 features, I think the tone of the film was never well captured or suggested by the trailer.
Well, maybe that's why we love them so much, because we had such low expectations going in.
What is it, other than just capturing the tone, there was a study that was released recently that suggested that people complain about trailers giving away too much. A study that came out recently suggested that people actually like to know how the movie ends. There's a sense of comfort going in that they're not going to be too shocked or too surprised. I don't buy into it, but that's apparently what this study suggested. For you, what makes a great trailer then?
All I can do is suggest the best trailer, which was what Stanley Kubrick did for The Shining.
Oh, God, yeah.
One image, blood coming in slow motion out of an elevator.
Yeah. And to your point about not liking the way, or knowing about the way the movie ends, I remember hearing they were making a movie about Titanic, and I was like, well, that'll never work.
Any other questions from the assembled press? Is there one down there? Yeah. No, we'll wrap it up then. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks to the panel. The film was called Downsizing.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey You Guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.
Hey